Designing the New Economies in a Time of Scarcity. So please join me in welcoming Marta Ceroni.
Well, thank you all for being here on this very weird day. Rain and warmth in February, not so common. Anyway, as I was listening to the presentation that Melissa just did of me, thanks for that, Melissa. I'm just so eager to tell the rest of this story of what I'm interested in right now. So let's delve in a little bit. Well, first of all, I don't know how many of you know the Donella Meadows Institute. We are based in Norwich, Vermont, so not far from here. And again, inspired and motivated in our existence by Donella Meadows, who most of you, I would say, probably know. And but at any rate, to me, she is certainly a pioneer of systems thinking, but going back to the whole idea of how we address the systemic question of what are limits to the expansion of human race, essentially, on the planet, which is something that I'm going to talk about, so I'm not getting into too many details. Currently, we have two tracks of work, and one is dedicated to cultivating her legacy, her tremendous wealth of works that are available on the web for free. So we have 1,000 pieces available on the website, donellameadows.org, so I invite you to visit there. And we also develop learning units. We are increasingly more interested in systems leadership, but doesn't need to lead from a systems perspective in business or non-profits and elsewhere. And also we are very keen on the conversation around what a new economy looks like. And we have been collaborating with several of you. Of course, we have here Chris Wood from Vail. We are partner in a lot of the thinking around new economy around here, and Vermont being so rich in experiments and ideas to bring elsewhere as well. So come visit. We are there with an open door policy at all times. Just briefly about me. The accent that you hear is Italian. So I just want to point out sort of the beginnings and where I am right now, right? So what motivated me in environmental sustainability has been, of course, living in the absence of natural capital, but also strange circumstances in the age of excessive extraction, let's say. It was a time when we had actually an oil refinery in the periphery of Milan that was so close to the downtowns. We were in, actually my family was not exactly in the downtown, so I was born fairly close to the downtown, but then living in the outskirts. And over there was a nationalized oil refinery called ENI, and one of the biggest ones, and it was spewing fumes every night from the refinement of the oil. And just that smell every single night, having to have our windows very much closed, but I was living in an old house, believe it or not, even in Milan, and so there was a lot of infiltration of bad quality air. So at an early age, that outrage sort of kicked in and motivated me through life. And so, because today I want to talk about limits to an extractive system, but also limits as a narrative, and so in motivations for acting. In my case, motivation came from outrage, and then it changed over time. So we are living and acting in a part of the world, or at least in the US here, that is a high sequestering carbon area. So that's a map actually of carbon sequestration. I come from a background of studies in forest ecology. My outrage led me to studying forests and really having a passion for trees. But then over time, I found myself struggling to find the root causes why forests and ecosystems were endangered and depleted. And that's when I landed to ecological economics. So just like, I mean, it's actually very different than environmental economics in the sense that it questions the assumptions of the whole economic system. It just doesn't only try to reorient the thinking, the applications of the economic thinking to the environment. So that's what I meant. So anyway, so we're here, me, you guys, we live in a highly sequestered area for carbon. And so from here, you might even also have the impression that things are fine. And I mean, I know we tend to connect to the rest of the world quite a lot. But at any rate, I'm sure you might have seen this slide before. It comes out of the Resilience Center in Stockholm Resilience Center. And it talks about acceleration. And so the whole idea of essentially a lot of indicators from the socioeconomic side, but also from the ecosystem and earth side of things, they all express this interesting behavior of acceleration. And in systems terms, you can think of acceleration as sort of an exponential growth, or there's some vicious cycle that actually spirals things up. And so what to take away from here, apart from some depression, of course, is that there is something that was actually surprising to the researchers there, was that this acceleration starts around 1950s. So that's the time when that sort of the design conditions of the economic system, or the way of living on this planet, start manifesting themselves in an accelerated way. And so we, as humans, in different parts of the planet, in different places of power or understanding of these phenomena, we have been trying to make sense of all of this. And so here I'm fond of this work that tries to capture the evolution of our environmental thinking over time. As we face this acceleration, we more and more realize what that looks like. And so you can see sort of the early days of environmentalism, so nature for itself, elite, white, rich people trying to push to protect these large tracts of land, well motivated, of course, very important, and that is building essentially also the basis of our protected areas in the US. Then that sort of understanding, or actually visibility of the impacts on Earth, that led to actually that sense of understanding in population biology. And that's a little bit also the time of outrage that I was talking about, so the 70s and going into that realization of the need to change. Clean Air Act also comes from that period of time. And then also reflecting the impact of my trajectory in the mid-2000s or so, nature for people. Okay, let's make the case for economic preservation. So there's an economic incentive and economic benefit in protecting species, in managing the ecosystem sustainably. And that's where I also landed personally at the Gandhi Institute. Let's make the economic case for all of that. And so you put a label, a dollar label on ecosystems that happened in 1997 in Nature. My boss at the time, Bob Costanza, became very famous for that. And personally, I also went away from that. I did a lot of that, but not for the sake of putting a price tag on nature, but more for the sake of the process itself. But I'm coming at a different place, and I think each of us, maybe wherever we are sort of feeling the larger change around us. And I think that's where we are more at this time, where people and nature and understanding the complexity and coming from a system perspective, I think that's very important. So it's not so much about making nature sort of appealing from an economic perspective, but it's going back to the roots of where value is intrinsically in people and in nature. And so, and of course, if you go back to that idea of the acceleration, some of the early people who started thinking about what acceleration means for ecosystems and for humanity, of course you encounter the whole discussion, the whole narrative of limits, and that's the symbol that you see here. So for today, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit more on the early notion of limits, the physicality of them, the fact that they obviously exist, but also in terms of a narrative. What does that mean, and where did that lead us? And so when you start thinking about limits, in a way, it's kind of interesting to see where do we hit the limits, what's causing the limits, and what's causing the limits to expansion in our system is essentially this common sense of sustainability. So basic house rules, essentially, like renewable resources must be used at or below the rate at which they regenerate themselves. And all of this, bear with me, it's all common sense, but it doesn't mean that that really helped in the whole process of designing a sustainable economy. So here, I have examples from deforestation in New England and Brazil. Of course, not much time to let the soil regenerate there or the forest. Another way we hit limits is, if we don't start adopting renewables at the speed or at the rate faster than non-renewables are used. So here are example of Indian women carrying charcoal and Maasai women actually spreading the solar technology. And of course, the pollution aspect, pollution cannot exceed the rates at which pollution can be absorbed or mitigated by ecosystems of the atmosphere. This is Lake Champlain, for example. There's a whole question around, of course, also legally and in terms of new limits from the EPA. And so this is something that is really in the front page and in the front of our mind all the time here in Vermont. If you layer these sort of basic rules of living on the planet with the principle that actually these renewables and non-renewables should also be shared fairly. So those are sort of the portfolio of the house rules for living on our planet. And that's where you start hitting the limits. And then, of course, you must be familiar with the planetary boundaries idea. And again, from also a narrative perspective, here it's an attempt to try to conceptualize the extent of the impacts. And each slice here is a slice that represents an impact on a given area. So, for example, we have biodiversity loss, being off the map essentially, and it just struck me this statistics actually that basically humans and their raised animals occupy 95% of the whole biomass of the planet, which is kind of mind-boggling if you think about it. Of course, the counterfact of that is a major biodiversity loss. So anyway, here, I'm not going into the details, but the idea is that the green zone is sort of the safe zone for a lot of these different variables, and of course, beyond that, it becomes an uncertain zone, and the big question of that we are oftentimes busy with and worried with is that of what does it mean to go off a safe zone of the planet. And so, again, this is a way of conceptualizing, of trying to understand, making sense of the exit and the impact. And equally similar, it's called the Oxfam's donut, where you actually add a layer of the social limits to the extractive system that we have. And I'm not, again, going into details because I wanted to show examples of how to sort of portray this idea of the larger impacts. And to me, these are concepts that are helpful. I don't know if you find them helpful, but at the same time, they don't have explicatory power. They don't analyze the root causes, why we have this overshoot. And also, they are rear mirror measures, so they cannot really help you much in terms of envisioning possibilities. But it's nevertheless a good way to picture the multidimensionality of these issues. I didn't want to scare you, but this is
You did.
But this is the World 3 model. And I want to go back to this, because this was the 70s, the early 70s. And so it was the first time that at the time of growth, at the time prosperity, at a time of non-questioning limits in any way, but certainly at a time of, visible signs of distress in ecosystems where they want to put attention. So there was the MIT group led by Jay Forrester and Dennis Meadows and Donella Meadows, Jürgen Randers and Bill Behrens and others, who started modeling actually from a system perspective with more explicitly power than, for example, the indicators or the conceptualization that I showed. They started questioning this idea of, okay, what does it mean to expand exponentially in a finite world? And so they picked 6 variables that range from population, food, mineral extraction, industrial output, services, and they started essentially modeling based on the current levels, the current data that they had, projecting them into the future in a model that was never heard before. This was a model that had such a level of complexity in the assumptions as well. And so non-linear processes were part of that, thresholds, vicious cycles or reinforcing feedback loops. So it was something unprecedented. And their main result, not that I want to spend too much on this, but there's some sort of very robust features of the model that still are relevant today. So you have on your left this standard run, and bear with me, there's only a couple or 3 curves that I'm going to mention so that you're not overwhelmed. And by the way, all the little letters that you see, those are also curves, but you shouldn't necessarily worry about those. So D stands for death, E stands for birth, and all that. So anyway, what's important here is that we have 200 years, right? So from 1900 to 2100, and essentially what the main result was, if we continued business as usual, would have been an initial peaking of industrial output and food around, I guess, probably around 2020, 2030. That's the initial prediction. The reason why they didn't put, details, dates, was that they didn't want this model to be predictive. Far from that, to want this to be something that they were, held, entrusted and accountable for in terms of predictions. So essentially, the main result, without going into details here, was that because of scarcity, because of this major depletion in resources, you can see, I don't have to point here, but resources are here essentially. There is this huge drop, and essentially is the manifestation of a world that is scarce. And so when scarcity hits, then basically extracting new resources from depleted soils to non-renewables being taken off the ground, everything becomes more expensive, and more capital then is allocated to extracting these resources or compensating for the loss, for example, soil fertility, to the point that then industrial output is suffering and the food system is suffering to end. With a delay later on, you see a peak in population and collapse. And so essentially, the standard run was around this idea that between 2020 and 2030, you would see a slowdown in the economy that would later on, given delays in the system, lead to a collapse in population. And so that you can imagine at the time, and probably you might remember what the reaction was. And actually, Chris and I showed a film that talks about that history, exactly what happened to the authors after the backlash they received. And so that's an example of a narrative that found people in such a denial and so unprepared to receive that inconvenient truth, indeed, probably the first one of many. And so that message then, after being sort of critiqued, and I even learned that some of the most prominent economists compiled entire reports against this report. So like 130 pages of, and most of that was actually interesting because it was not based necessarily on the science. So it was based more on that sort of gut reaction, because at the time the science was not developed enough to really do a full critique. So at any rate, So the model became famous for doom and gloom, and it was forgotten essentially for 40 years. But one part of the story that is not told is actually that there was a stabilized world possibility. But before I get to that, I should say that the standard run was tested against different scenarios, including a scenario of high tech. So what if we have basically limitless resources, we use clean technologies, we recycle 75%, the most amazing technological improvements you could imagine. What does that do to this model? And that would push overshoot and collapse to later on, like 20 or 30 years later, but it would still happen. So overshoot and collapse sort of became known as that very robust feature, that even if you try extreme changes, the model produces still the same behavior. Except the stabilized world, where the assumptions were that population, actually the families would start family planning, there would be a 2-children policy, and it would be reconstruction of soil. You can imagine this was not so much into excessive technology, but is implementing policies that make total sense. And so essentially they were able to simulate at least one scenario of stabilization, but this one was never discussed. So in terms of narratives, this was left behind and forgotten, although here were some interesting hints at how actually to manage this runaway growth. Interestingly enough, a few years ago, Graham Turner wanted to go back to industry growth and just retest where we were, retest the assumptions, and overlay new data essentially. And so in the gray part is this historical data set the industry growth team used. And in orange, you find, so these here are the new data in orange, the observed data, so added. And we have then different scenarios. One scenario is the business as usual, so the standard one, which is, let's see which color, yeah, it's the light green here. And then stabilized world, so you have the squares, and then you have the comprehensive technology, the scenario that I mentioned. So what happens here? So with population, it seems like we are tracking pretty well the business as usual, the standard, and we don't know about the comprehensive technology. And here notice that actually the author took the time to put the dates in, so actually it's pretty clear. And so population, you're seeing food per capita. We are, it seems, above the standard run, but certainly now the stabilized world, with the idea in the stabilized world we will have more food for all, essentially, and certainly not close to comprehensive technology. What's interesting is industrial output per capita, in which we are staying fairly close also to the standard run. And again, not that I want to go too much into detail, but it's kind of interesting that we are following the standard run in some way. And so that's sort of a call for alarm, of course, but what's interesting to me is that robustness that shows up all the time. So what does it mean for us as we start thinking about designing alternative economies with this notion that the system has a pull towards these dynamics. And so one other reason why linguistic growth and this type of thinking and modeling has become interesting is the current debate about how do we actually stabilize the climate in a way that also enables some level to grow. And so is that possible at all? So there is, you probably have read a lot, New York Times, Paul Krugman, big debates in terms of using actually climate change as an economic opportunity. The climate summit happened, the climate economic summit happened in Randolph at Vermont College a few days ago. So at any rate, so that's a big question that comes back at this very time. Is that even possible to decouple growth from emissions? And so, I don't know, that would have been an interesting discussion with you all, but so there is definitely that idea out there that yes, it is possible. to decouple growth and emissions. And so that's more like the, I guess, technical optimist in a way. And I found some interesting data actually from the European Commission showing for 2014 in the report like a cumulative analysis of emissions, GDP, and also greenhouse gas emissions intensity. So in blue, you see that GDP basically went up. But at the same time, you saw that emissions went a little bit down. And so in this case, so not that I want to go into the data necessarily, but so what's interesting is that a lot of the debate has been around whether this decoupling is real or is not. So sometimes, you could have economic growth that shoots up, and then you have emissions that increase but not as fast as GDP. So then some people also call that as a decoupling, but in reality, emissions in total still increase. So in this case, there is a certain level of decoupling that is observed. But the question is, and I'll get to the question. And so here what you see is a simplification of, in a way, that vision. How can we achieve that through technology in a way that is sustainable, compatible with growth? And that's where I was going. So the question is, yes, can we do that? Yes, but the amount of decoupling that is necessary is actually so enormous in some ways that actually this transition will require some deep transformation, part of which will include a desirable reduction in growth and a contraction of the economy. So that's sort of a dichotomy that I don't know if you find in your even your studies, your activism, your work. It's something that has affected me profoundly in terms of, and I see that all the time. And so according to this worldview, then again, another depiction is more of the eco-communalism, and these are actually, by the way, resources from the Great Transition Initiative at the London Institute, and they did a great job actually at sort of imagining different possibilities. Yes, I'll be done soon. So, at any rate, so that's one way that this discussion on the limits has come back in this current discussion. And then, of course, so if that's a way that actually can allow us to go through a transition, a way that, mentioning the second case, yes, what do we need to do actually to transform more deeply, more systemically the system? And that's a question that, of course, is being posed in many ways, and certainly more and more frequently on the streets. And so one thing that I wanted to mention today that is very helpful to me in understanding whether we are designing economies that have leverage, that solutions that have the possibility of transforming a system. Then I go back to the framework of the leverage points that Donella Meadows developed in 1999. And so, how many people are familiar with this type of work? And first of all, the article is available online for sure. But the whole idea here is that instead of going through a whole discussion on systems, Donella provided us with a little bit of a shortcut. After years and years of modeling systems studied from the 70s, as I mentioned, and beyond, she was able to distill, pills of knowledge around where to intervene in systems to cause the most impact, where you can shift one thing and that shift causes many other things to change. And so she had the idea of 12 stages. I'm very sorry about this. This has never happened. So, let's see if that works. So at any rate, I'm glad actually, by the way, this is a very welcoming audience, despite me being anxious, etc. So anyway, so there were these ideas around 12 like points that had essentially had a hierarchy to them. So there are places that have more power than others, and leverage points are always places of power. And so you don't have to read them all. So they range from tweaking at the margin with weights and numbers of parameters to actually, thinking completely different. Some of them are more related to the characteristics of systems and how they behave. Some other ones are really so high level that I wanted to focus on them. And these are these last ones: information flows, rules, self-organization of systems, goals that also minds the paradigms, and transcending all of those, all of the above. And so the question that I'm posing here to you, to myself, as I look at solutions that are emerging around, because we are all eagerly looking for the solutions, is which ones have the most power to transform systems. And so I started looking at the perspective of looking at some ideas or some solutions around goals. And so Donella thought that whenever you tweak with the goal of the system, basically what is designed to achieve, and it's not so much the stated goal of the system, but it's actually what the system produces in behavior because of how it's designed. And so you could say, well, what is the goal of the economy? You could come up with many answers. We want jobs, we want to meet basic needs, we want many things out of the economy. But if you observe clearly the behavior of the current economic system, it is designed to grow. So therefore, the goal of the economy is the result of that behavior, growth. And so, with that in mind, I just wanted to share a little bit about the genuine progress indicator, which is a response to that idea of what is the goal of the economy. And so, yes, whenever you talk about goals, of course, you encounter indicators. And so if we want the economy to grow, well, we measure growth, right? So GDP as a measure of growth has been criticized in many ways. I'm not going to go into that whole literature discussion. But in 2012, Vermont passed a law for measuring economic well-being differently. And there are 20 other states that are examining this idea, and it's being tested and applied elsewhere. Maryland was actually the first state that started adopting a genuine progress indicator. Although it was Governor Marta Ceroni who wanted it, and it was never legislated for. And therefore, we're not sure what's going to happen to the GPI in Maryland. So Vermont is the only state at the moment that actually has it as a law. And so that and the Gandhi Institute is doing the work to collect data every year and releasing a report, in fact. And so what's interesting about the genuine progress indicator is that, well, first of all, it distinguishes between what growth is good for people and what isn't. And also it includes things that the GDP completely ignores, like the value of volunteering work or solidarity. From an economic perspective, it's very interesting because it's the only indicator out there that actually includes income inequality. Does it make a difference if more people have opportunities or only a small elite? And so you can see here that income inequality goes by 29% in Vermont from 1970 to 2010. And Vermont has some of the fastest growing land prices in the whole of the US. So what it essentially does, it starts from similar to the GDP. It starts with personal consumption, and then it adds or subtracts things that are beneficial or not beneficial. And so you can see that, for example, environmental costs are including the cost of climate change, the cost of losing farmland and soil, and anyway. So this gives you also an idea of the answer to the question. So maybe we have to ask the question, what can grow and what should be grown in an economy? And oftentimes, ecological economists are pretty vague. Sometimes you hear this narrative of growth, no growth, but then there is nothing in between, and there's not enough nuance to really understand. And so I think GPI, besides being a tool for thinking differently about the economy, also answer that question, what can grow and what shouldn't grow. If you look over a few decades here, of course GPI at some point stops growing and GDP continues on, and the gap, of course, is kind of sometimes a very, it's a sort of a dry chart, but that gap between GPI and GDP is actually the overshoot. It's the cost that we inflict to people not being able to afford services and education, etc., but also the planet and ecosystems being depleted. So that's an example of how, one thing I didn't mention is that these costs and benefits are calculated monetarily. So that's a good application of that environmental economics kind of accounting that we were talking about, especially as part of my earlier work. And so we were talking GPI as a response to the question, what is the goal of the economy? From a corporate perspective, again, goals, having different goals, and a set of different goals is very important. And benefit corporations are an institution, a structure that actually enables alternative goals. And so, how many people are familiar with benefit corporations? I would say majority of you. And so, that's interesting because through that structure, you allow actually the pursuit of different goals other than profit, of course. And I checked when some of the states approved legislation to allow benefit corporations, and most of them were actually last year. I think the last one was Tennessee in January, Vermont in 2011, so Maryland in 2010. So there's been a whole swarm actually of legislative work around this. And so, of course, if you layer this structure with an ownership structure like of worker ownership, that even empowers these rules and the goals even more strongly. I would go into the importance of self-organization. So systems, you achieve a lot of power and change when you allow systems to reorganize themselves and be adaptive and be inventive around institutions, for example. And so self-organization is a quality of systems that makes them more powerful, as you can imagine. And so oftentimes when I think, the first image I have thinking of self-organization, in this case, is the time when we had Irene and communities got together and entire new streams of funding were created and collaborations that were not possible before. As an example of self-organization, the power of that in systems is the power of networks. And so that's one of the most uplifting examples of states and communities working towards a shared vision of achieving 50% of food produced regionally by 2060, and that's the New England Food Vision. And I'm glad that Vermont Farm to Plate is actually a partner in this initiative, and so actually the different partnerships around food are talking to one another in New England and planning together. And again, in Vermont, so the power of networks. So these are structure and governance mechanisms that didn't exist before, but in this region, actually, Vermont, I think, is particularly attuned to this way of working, but never before, I think we have fully blown networks working on the food system, reinventing it and creating jobs at the same time, but then having this idea of soil to soil. So, for example, Vermont Farm to Plate is a network that started with 30 members. They had farmers, lenders, bankers, distributors, legislators, so individuals and organizations were at the table that had a shared agenda, a shared vision, shared metrics, going back to metrics. And also had a backbone organization like the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund that was allowing this to happen. They have working groups, they started with 30 members, and they have more than 300 members at the moment. And so it's a good example of how a systems view actually, in fact, they did a systems map of the food system before they decided which working groups to focus on. The energy field worked similarly with the Energy Action Network in Vermont. And they also did a systems map, and they also have working groups and highlighting 11 points that they decided to work on. And very lately, so I mentioned the work that Vermont Council on Rural Development is doing around the Vermont climate economy. And that's a big question mark, but because it's emerging now. And it could be the seed of a new network that actually integrates the existing ones around making Vermont a special place for actually devising a climate-safe economy. What does it mean to invest in alternative businesses? Technology, yes, with the renewables, but also the replenishing of the soil and in connection with the farm to plate as well. So that's an interesting emerging, I would say, community for sure. It's not yet shaped as a network. It could, and so that would be something to watch. It's something to keep on your horizon. And what was very actually interesting to me is that the word growth was never used. I read the whole report and I attended their summit at the beginning of this week. And so, but instead development was used with the idea of actually not having the growth mantra constantly there. And regarding development, that would be judged and evaluated using the general policy indicator, so alternative metrics. So I'm pretty hopeful, and I want to share that as a possible network or supra network forming there. Getting to my towards the end of the presentation, and so rules and information flows. So of course, places of power are also new rules that you set in the system, and new information flows that you create. So I was just thinking that one important rule that is emerging is that of carbon pricing and carbon tax, of course. This is a map actually worldwide of where there is action going either through emission trading schemes or to actual carbon taxes. And this comes from the World Bank. Again, not in that detail, but to give you a sense that there is a big chunk of the world that actually is interested in exploring this idea. But what spoke to me lately was this idea that 6 oil companies actually wrote to Christiana Figueres at the United Nations to demand a carbon price. And that was at the time of COP21 in Paris. And at the same time that this was happening, we learned that ExxonMobil was lying egregiously about the internal findings of climate change that they had. And so, again, from a systems perspective, it's interesting that one group of big polluters is asking for a carbon price, and then another one is trying to mystify and sort of hide information flows that were essential. So information flows are keep systems clean and functioning, and they're essential from that perspective. I just wanted to mention that, of course, the role of business is essential here in some of these rules, and I just learned that not only Ben and Jerry has their own have their own internal carbon accounting and carbon pricing, but also they were joined by certification. So that's a case where sort of business is ahead of legislation in that case, or policy. And an extension of that, how many people have heard of the Vermont Common Assets Fund? So that's an idea that is a few years old. There was a bill that was presented, I don't remember what it was, 2011, 2010, and it's been sort of sitting somewhere and waiting to be resuscitated, I think. But this idea of, again, it extends, the idea of pricing is actually taxing use of ecosystems and the surplus that is generated in the economy. It dates back to the idea of everybody being born with a right to a share of ecosystem wealth, essentially. And Peter Barnes is actually one of the key proponents of this idea. And essentially, you will charge for the use of nature services, and you would create a trust fund in perpetuity. And it would function a little bit like the royalties, the oil royalties in Alaska. And so 75% of these funds would be used for ecosystem restoration and renewables. And part of that, of the whole fund, 5% would be actually shared as dividends. So it would be your Earth citizens' dividends. And that gets us closer to a little bit the sort of places of power like mindsets and worldviews. Because that, first of all, creates the notion of being entitled by right, by being alive, by being a human being on this planet, to this share. And that's a concept that is totally anti-mainstream. And people get a check, of course. This is actually my dear friend Gary Flomenoff, who did calculations at the Ghana Institute. And at this point, so at the level of, so nothing has more power than changing your worldview or your way of thinking about something. And Donella mentions that even more powerful than that is recognizing that you can transcend your worldviews and your mindsets. So that sort of awareness of what you actually think and you actually believe, so that you don't identify necessarily 100% with your ideas. And so that she places first in terms of the most impactful way, which is, we've been talking a lot with Chris, is the transformational approach, like cultivating that awareness at a deeper level as individuals, and how do you bring that awareness into the teams, the groups that you work with, and eventually design the structures or like networks that we saw, based out of that cultivation of how you transcend paradigms. So I was lucky to be in Paris during the second week of the climate talks, and this was a message that I'll never forget. So I was hanging out with a lot of artists over there to try to change the climate narrative. And to me, this slogan, or this expression is very transformational. So we are not fighting for nature, we are nature defending itself. And so you can think of ways to look at nature. You could start identifying the villains in the system, the ones who exploit nature, or the ones opposite of that are the ones who actually are caregivers and take care of nature. But what if we are nature and we actually remember and go, and we don't have to reinvent ourselves as destroyers or caretakers, but we actually remember who we are. And I just wanted to leave you with that.
So we'll just open it up to questions, and why don't you raise your hand if you have a question, and Marta can call on insurance.
Financing, how do you create the money to transition to this new economy, and do carbon offsets play a role in that?
So the money question is interesting because it has different levels, and one level is, well, we need slow money. Slow money not as the organization, but we need to slow money down in terms of that's a big driver. And so that's sort of at a system level that would achieve a lot. So having economies that have a stabilized throughput, but also have money that doesn't grow so exponentially and create that bubble out there that is out of tune with the reality of the working economy. So that's one answer. The other one, there are many innovative ways to finance renewables. I mean, this idea of the trust fund, the common assets, is of course out there. It's of course so kind of revolutionary in a way that is not even debated at the moment. But the carbon tax is a similar idea of creating a fund. But in reality, there are so many interesting ways that, for example, Energy Action Network is devising with involving the role of utility companies, and creating, even net positive returns from installing, for example, renewables on your roof right away because you have, affordable capital to do that from utility companies, for example. I'm just citing one example, but there's a ton that is being discussed. In fact, what was interesting to me, because I'm part of the capital mobilization group with the Energy Action Network, and apparently there is no lack of money at the moment in Vermont for making the big transition with renewables, but the demand is not yet there. And so increasing the demand and understanding how these different solutions work together to come to a coherent package that someone with a overworked life doesn't have to go crazy to implement. So there are other barriers, but it seems that that's solvable. Questions? Questions or comments, in fact?
I have a question about the systems being part of it, and a lot of times you talk about what we can do and we can intervene, but we're not at the top of the system. So
you mean like
it's a question of framing? Yeah, it's a question of how do what's the granularity that you're looking at. So I sort of tend to view things more from a thermodynamic perspective, and so when that energy there, we burn it, and so we let little molecules run all over, and you go to Paris, and everyone I talk to, talks about these things, but they really don't actually reduce their consumption. They don't actually want to not have children. They don't actually want to stop traveling. They want everything to kind of go along, but we'll just, come up with different sort of excuses or rationales to keep going with this. And this is the idea of the question this gentleman was saying, well, how can we finance it? Well, there won't be financing in our future without growth. That it won't. I mean, you just won't have money that works the way it works now. So it's a question of are we in control, and why do we convince ourselves that we have this power?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a neat question.
Does that make sense? I know I went to ramble a little bit in and out, but
yeah. So it seems that certainly there is. I can see.
As though it's a machine with dials that we can somehow turn the dial on ourselves, and I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah. So, my answer could be quite extreme.
Yeah, that's okay. For me, that's okay.
I think, if you guys read This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein, she has a wonderful introduction about denial.
And she went and had a child.
And so she
went and had a child so that would give her hope.
Right.
So you know what I'm saying? This is something maybe we can't control our psychology.
So, but to me, that initial introduction that she portrays denial in such a relatable way that you could recognize yourself looking away, or not wanting to feel the pain, or some other way. So at any rate, I actually had the experience of being with a powerful group of systems thinkers last year, and we had an evening of discussions and fun. And one activity that was proposed by one of the participants was to declare the day of your death. We would go in circle, and each of us would pick a day. We different ages and stuff, and we would just say when that would be. And you can imagine the climate in the room, there were people from all over the world. There were Russians who refused. They're like, no, I'm sorry.
That's very interesting.
I should say, actually, the lady who did this exercise, who proposed this exercise, was American, one of the few Americans there. And she had worked a lot with leadership development and whatnot. So at any rate, the reason why she did that, the reason why we did that exercise was like, okay, if we don't face our own mortality and we are in denial by the very nature of being human, how can we actually face the crisis out there and take action if we don't get to that point of that authenticity? So, despite the fact that people were shocked and not particularly amused by the whole thing, so she struck a chord. The next day, she had a few people coming to her and actually wanted to talk about that stuff. So, at any rate, so one thing is, okay, how do you, get to that denial at a very deep level of authenticity within us? And also, I think it's just an important skill. One thing I didn't say is like, Donella, after writing that report, was highly scientific and all, but then, they came out with the second report 20 years later, and a third report 30 years later. And the results were all the same. And at some point they said, no, enough, we're not going to do that again. And so what she resorted to was actually to focus on the human qualities that enable the sustainable transition. And for her, those qualities were listening, learning, and being humble, loving, and networking, connecting with others. So in the end, she even gave up a tenured position at Dartmouth. She stayed a lecturer for all the rest of her life because she wanted to have time to write, because she thought that writing columns, weekly columns, for example, for Value News, but syndicated throughout the nation, would have more power to reach people's hearts in, exactly playing people's hearts. And so, but then going back to your question, at the higher scale, I think the transition is from what I can do, what can I do, to we, and sort of who else cares about this, who else is good at this and can help it. And so the networking becomes what is my next level of engagement beyond what I do at home, and many of us are so motivated that sometimes it becomes like almost a religion or a philosophy, and you don't even talk about it anymore. Yes, you wear sweaters. Yes, it becomes that's not going to make a difference altogether. Even if we all did it, it's not going to make a difference. But it's like our individual daily ritual that keeps us true to the cause. I think. I don't know how you guys see it.
I think that we all lose sight of the point, and I think that's incorrect, that the small changes actually, do make a big difference. We all can make a difference. The thing is, we're all sitting here talking on this large scale, like what is the main problem, but each community has its own problems and difficulties, and so I think that instead of trying to, have this blanket statement, like this is the problem, this is what, how we can solve it, we just have to look within ourselves and our community, address the problem there, come together and make changes, and that's where change starts and begins. And so we can do it. The power is in our hands. We're relying on the wrong system. So it's place-based solutions, I think.
Yeah, and just quickly as a reaction, also the idea that climate emissions and technology, it becomes so confining, right? What about everything else, like species out there and food and
It creates a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm. So we'll go to you and then here.
So sorry.
You go there. I'm sorry, the region name.
Chaya. Yeah, so when you talk about goals, I thought of them as sustainable development goals, because all of them, like the 17 goals that we have out now, define them clearly. And when you talk about the GPI, is it based on the Canadian model?
So the Canadian Index of Well-being?
Yes.
Unfortunately not, because that's my favorite set of indicators, which, unlike the GPI that was developed by a group of experts and then sort of forced into public policy, etc., that was developed bottom-up. and so communities.
And GPI is what is like downwards up approach.
Yeah, the GPI is more like expert based, and versus Canadian Index of Wellbeing in terms of the process how that was developed. Also, the Canadian Index of Wellbeing is it looks at increases as decreases as percentages, so it doesn't do any monetary calculations. So some of the indicators overlap, but they trace the delta, the differential. Yeah.
So, what do you think is the need right now to study behavioral implications to adjust it in the final decision making or the policy making, or maybe economic behavioral impacts on individuals?
Yeah, that is. I think that's super important. That's my answer. I mean, but so how? But then I would say that I would not be satisfied by just understanding. Once you understand things, yes, it helps. But then, how do you actually make the transformation from understanding intellectually and publishing papers about it, versus actually, bringing skills, the skills that I was mentioning before, into your work environment, into the planning? How do you talk about these soft things with policymakers? So that would be very interesting. I would just say that academic level understanding. And we had you in pink.
So I've recently, in the last few years, become aware of this thing. You can Google it, the One Earth calculator. Trying to live like your water usage, gas, fuel, all the resources, as if there were only one Earth, instead of like you had the resources of 30 years for you personally to pull on. I've been looking at co-housing, and there's quite a variety there. I've been down to Cog Hill, and it's quite an interesting journey to look at all the places that think they're co-housing. Yeah,
I've been there too.
I think that's kind of greenwashing in some cases, but
You mean, I'm sorry, so you made a comment on your experience with co-housing communities and being a little bit like a greenwashing? I didn't understand that part.
so I think of co-housing should be more like a sharing economy, and reduce consumption in the way of like, every house doesn't need to have its own washer and dryer.
Sure.
That sort of thing. And if the one washer and dryer does break, everybody's going to chip in to fix it instead of everyone having their own washer and dryer. And well, I've got the money to fix mine, too bad that yours broken, you can't afford to fix yours. It's part of a mindset too.
No, I
I don't know if that's going astray from what you're trying to say, but I just bring it back to there's a lot more of people at the grassroots level, if you think in terms of the pyramid, than there are people at the very top. And so actually, if every individual can think in terms of the one Earth and things like that, and modify their life changes, whether they choose not to eat meat, not because of animals, but just the consumption of water and so forth.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm very fond of those tools, and they work for some people. Unfortunately, not for all. So, but yeah, you provide good visions of sharing, and I've been. We were based at Cog Hill, by the way, so our institute. And who else do we have? So we had here comment.
Yes, about the GPI. How is it being used now? And are there any examples of it actually getting some traction in driving decision making?
Yeah, so I think probably the most advanced work was done in Maryland, because it was actually a good group of people who could translate, the indicator level narrative to, okay, what does it mean for budgeting and for policies? And so, so there are examples in Maryland. So for example, new policies, bills being proposed, and then you would have like a GPI card. What would this do to the GPI? How would, so every time that there is maybe a budgeting question, a budgeting decision, then you would see the counterpart for the GPI. And if it's good for the GPI, it's good for all, and then there would be people supporting, so it was a tool to add transparency and true costing within the policy discussion. And here in Vermont, we don't have that liaison between, so what we have is an academic institution that is keeping the data and releasing the reports, but not doing too much publicity and outreach. And then there's the Agency of Commerce and Community Development actually is tracking, also using the GPI in their own planning. So it was part of the comprehensive economic development plan, the first one that Vermont developed. But I just met with the gentleman who is supervising that work at the agency, and he was complaining that we don't have that liaison here in Vermont. Someone who's a champion and tries to work with legislators and budgeting offices, and so that's been a little bit behind. So far it has had a sort of an awareness raising type of effect, and it has started to make some, have some impact in budgeting, but not as extensively as you want to see. And personally, I've been struggling with how to make it more interesting and so that people would be, or communities for that matter. But again, going back to the question behind, so I actually like the Canadian model much better because it was bottom up and people got energized as a way to measure real progress within their communities the way they wanted it. And so if, depending on your target audience, you should choose. I don't think the GPI is super effective for engaging people.
Let's see, I'm aware of one kind of interesting model that helps network people who are trying to live according to different standards. And I wonder whether, and I'll say what it is in a second, but my question is whether there are other, whether it could be extended much more broadly to help get to where we need to get for some of these levers. So, for example, animal agriculture, reducing the amount of beef that people eat, which would have a big effect on greenhouse gas emissions. The interesting model that I came across was something called part-time carnivores, which is kind of big in the UK and Australia, barely exists here. And you can elect to, withhold from animal products, 1 day a week or 7 days a week, and you go online and it shows how it affects your carbon footprint. And so I learned about that, and I became the 28th member in the US. And they told, and I asked, how can I connect with other people? And they said, we don't reveal that, but the most effective way is to have teams and make it fun, and there are a lot of young people, they have t-shirts, whatever. So the idea is that, like you were talking about, it's community-based, it's bottom-up, and yet it's connected to other teams all around your country and the world. So you feel like there's a momentum, or you feel like there's support, or maybe it's like the, whatever that B corporation kind of thing was, which I'm not familiar with it. So I guess my question is, do you know of things within our country that help people feel connected in their efforts and in their principle changing, like she was talking about? So you don't just feel like,
you feel that you're part of something bigger.
Yeah.
It used to be that the Center for New American Dream had campaigns like that, so that so if you're boycotting flying, you would team up with others who are doing the same, so you actually start feeling a little bit more of an impact. I don't know if they're still doing it, but I thought it was a remarkable effort there.
Yeah.
And because I totally agree, sometimes you just feel powerless otherwise.
Thank you.
we're gonna need to cut it off here. So if there's one last burning question, we can take it, but we have to wrap things up. And if not, we can just close it out.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much.